I called the public meeting to order at 2. We recessed right away, and we went to a executive session. We're now closing that executive session, and we'll reconvene the public meeting. And the first item on the public meeting is public comment.
We don't have anyone signed up at this time.
Is there anyone that forgot to sign up or wants to speak that didn't sign up? Very good. We'll move to our next item, which is the consent agenda.
A motion to approve consent agenda items A through C.
Gentlemen, do you have any questions on the consent agenda?
I do not. No.
Hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Passes 3-0. Our next item is a presentation.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. My name is Mike Stoner. I'm the Environmental Director. And I have a presentation to make to you on one of the model toxic control sites up in Blaine. This one is the Blaine Marina Incorporated site. Blaine, I'll call it Blaine Marina as we go through the slideshow here, but it is not to be confused with Blaine Harbor, which is the port's marina. So this is a nomenclature thing that we need to keep straight as we go through these kind of presentations and the document that I'll be talking about as well. Blaine Marina Incorporated is one of the port's tenants. They've been up in Blaine for over 50 years. They run a fueling operation for Blaine Harbor. And unfortunately, because of some spills and past practices, there's been releases of mostly petroleum contamination to the ground. And so we've been working under an agreed order with the Department of Ecology to get that historic legacy of contamination cleaned up and get back in business into the future. So here's a little bit of a close-up of what we call the Industrial Peninsula, part of the Blaine Harbor area. And what you can see here on the left-hand side of the slide is an outline that shows the Blaine Marina, Inc. Matka site. And you can see a couple of important things here. What this slide shows is current land use. So currently it shows that the property is being used by our tenant for fueling. You can see the fuel storage tanks that are highlighted on this figure. And one really important piece here that I'll get into a little bit further as we move along is the black dashed outline that identifies the boundaries of the site. So under this agreed order, we have done extensive investigation of the site to determine the nature and the extent of contamination. That's one of the requirements of the remedial investigation that ecology has us do. And the really good news here is that even though it's been in operation for quite some period of time, there's no contamination that extends over the bank into the aquatic land itself. That's a terrific fact here, because once you get into the aquatic land and the marine environment, projects tend to get much, much more expensive. So this is one that, because of the kind of tight soil conditions up there, whatever spills there have been really contained to a localized situation. Now, the port has also gone through a fairly extensive planning exercise for this portion of the Blaine Harbor area. There's a draft master plan, a conceptual master plan that's been put together back in May 2013, so a couple years ago. It is not a plan that has been really approved and nailed down by the commission. It's a working document. So I bring that up because as we move forward with our cleanup plans here, one of the things that the environmental department does is go to real estate or marinas division and ask those people what the future land use is for this piece of property so that we can dial a cleanup in that works for that future land use and is protective of those future land uses. That's one of the things that the Department of Ecology requires of us. Define your land use, and then they'll help identify a safe and protective remedy. So at this point, the Blaine Marina Inc. is on a month-to-month lease. We don't expect them to be there for much more than the short term. And so we have some flexibility in terms of land use planning up there. Mr. Jorgensen?
The money already invested in cleanup years ago?
Yes, unfortunately, it's a very small amount relative to the estimated cleanup cost. So they put a certain amount of money into an escrow account, but it's like I say, it's a small fraction of what's necessary up there. So I'll get into that a little bit more later. But what we expect this site to be funded by is a combination of grants from the state and using the port's environmental reserve for just this kind of circumstance. So this is a close-up of the tanks. Again, these have been in place for a long time. We expect that moving forward, we will remove these tanks, have them taken down to the ground. And if there is going to be a future fueling station here, they would probably be, they would require new tanks and fueling systems to be installed. This one is just way beyond its design life and needs to be replaced. So here's a highlight of the area. You can see here, again, this outer boundary, the extent of contamination. The yellow area is what we refer to as an area of lower level contamination. There's a variety of different approaches to deal with that kind of contamination. And again, the contamination here is the types of contaminants associated with fueling operations. So we have total petroleum hydrocarbons, gasoline range hydrocarbons, that sort of thing. In the orange area, that's an area of heavy contamination, even including free products. So back in the early 90s, there was a spill there that included thousands of gallons released to the ground. And again, because of this very tight soil condition, it really hasn't migrated very far. There hasn't been much of a cleanup done since then. The Dobbs installed some monitoring wells that they've used for, baling free product, but it's not really anything that we would call a remedial action. So that's the site. We've got an overall area of low contamination and a centralized area of free product underneath the location of the old tanks. But the good news is nothing's beyond the bank.
Mike, back to that picture slide, if you could. That shows buildings there in the light, low-level contamination. Is that under the buildings?
Yes, thanks for bringing that up. Yes, we have done sampling underneath those buildings, and we've determined that some of the petroleum contamination has migrated underneath the building slab. So in my perfect world, we'd take down the building, dig up the slab, and go in and really aggressively clean up that contamination. But we can also clean up the contamination under that building slab, leaving the building in place. So leaving the building in place is an option. We have a couple of other sites where we've done just that. And this gives another view of that exact point. The Department of Ecology requires us to put together what they call a conceptual site model, just really given a cartoon that shows what we're dealing with here. So what you see here is you see the above ground structures, basically the fueling facility itself with buildings, a secondary containment wall, and the tanks. Then you see a layer of unsaturated soil, the yellow, where we have quite a bit of petroleum contamination in that layer. And then deeper down in the groundwater saturated zone, we also have some evidence of contamination that's migrated vertically down. What you see on the left-hand side of the column is the model is a bulkhead that has been recently installed. And you can see an arrow showing groundwater migration to the bay, but what we don't have in this picture, based on sampling, is any evidence that petroleum contamination has migrated out into the aquatic environment. So it's a fairly well-contained site contamination area. So just to go through Ecology's Model Toxic Control Act process real quickly, I know you've seen this a bunch of times, but I want to just go through it one more time here. Ecology steps through this process. They first do an initial site assessment to determine whether or not they have something worth looking at further. In this case, they did. And so then the next step is a remedial investigation feasibility study. The port enters into an agreed order and agrees to perform that RIFS for Ecology. That's where we investigate the site and determine what kind of cleanup options there are. What Ecology typically does then is take that draft RIFS and put it out for public comment. And they are ready to publish that draft RIFS now. It's one that the port has developed with our consultants, Landau Associates. It's been reviewed word by word, figure by Ecology. They're ready to have it go out to public comment. And they have identified within the range of alternatives a preferred alternative. The reason I'm here today is because they like us to come to the Port Commission and make sure the Port Commission is willing to implement the preferred alternative before they put it out to public comment. So we've worked this preferred alternative up at the staff level. We've given the Port Commission some initial briefings, and this is one where we just want to make sure that you understand it and agree with moving forward in this direction. The other blue bar here refers to interim actions. They can also be performed under an agreed order. And in this site, we have performed an interim action that included a partial cleanup and the installation of a new bulkhead at the shoreline to make sure that whatever contamination is in soil and groundwater cannot move further towards the marine environment. That was a very successful operation I'll describe very quickly. So then the next steps, once the RIFS goes out to public comment and Ecology confirms their preferred alternative, is for the port and Ecology to work together to develop a consent decree, a legal document, that also has a cleanup action plan, basically a plan to implement the preferred alternative. And then we move into, under that consent decree, the port would perform remedial design and permitting, and then go ahead, once we have the permits, to perform construction and long-term monitoring. And in this site, because it's all upland, no in-water work, design and permitting is pretty straightforward. Okay? So here's a picture of the interim action that we performed in 2012. And this was, you may recall us showing you pictures of the old dilapidated shoreline and the building here that was literally falling apart. What Ecology required was the removal of that old building, taking all product out of the building, and installing this new sheet pile bulkhead right at the top of bank. So there was a fair amount of contaminated soil that was pulled out to install that bulkhead, and so we're very confident now that it represents a hard edge, literally, to the site boundary at the waterway. That was a successful operation, and it was a pretty cost-effective one, too. It cost about $125,000. So then getting back to the RIFS, we looked at a range of alternatives. That's one of the things ecology likes to look at. And so the range of alternatives goes from a little under $2 million to $4.7 million. Alternative 2 is identified as the preferred alternative at about $2.2 million. So the difference here is basically how aggressive you go after this contamination. So with alternative 1, there's a little bit less digging. With alternative, I'll describe alternative 2 in a moment here. With alternative 3, there's more digging of dirty dirt. Alternative 4 then includes a more aggressive hydraulic barrier between the high level of contamination and the shoreline, and you basically ramp up from there. But all things considered, what ecology requires us to do is put together a disproportionate cost analysis. And what they have determined, based on the evaluation of what you get for the dollars spent, they've identified alternative 2 as the alternative that gives you the highest cost benefit and meets the required cleanup goals for the site.
Mike, is alternative 6 tearing the buildings down?
Yes. Yeah, all of these alternatives actually include taking out the old tanks, and
But the buildings in yellow?
the buildings in yellow, I think I have to go back and look at that.
Alternative 6 tearing those out as well?
These all assume that that soil underneath these slabs will have to be remediated. And I'll have to go back and confirm this, Commissioner Robbins, but I think what we've done is we've said the buildings are a tenant improvement, and they would have to be removed at the end of the current lease by Blaine Marina, Inc. So it's not a cost element built in here, but I'll go back and confirm that to you. So here's a little bit more detail about alternative 2, the preferred. What you see here, the blue area points to the area where the above-ground tanks will be removed. And then we also include the black area pointing to the existing sheet pile bulkhead. And what ecology is asking us is to extend that a little bit to the north beyond what we did in the interim action.
There was no, excuse me, what? There was no fuel in the mud, I assume, around the fuel dock? Is that, you said it's all upland?
That's right.
Nothing, that's amazing.
Good news. Yeah, we investigated that both in the shoreline and in sediments, and came up nice and clean, or meeting standards. So that was a nice surprise. We don't usually get nice surprises. So in the in this slide, we show the area in this light blue where we propose to remove approximately 3,000 tons of contaminated soil. This is soil that's basically contaminated with free product. Get that out, ship it off to a Subtitle D landfill for proper final disposal, and then we would backfill that area with clean fill, structural fill. In the lightly shaded yellow area, then, we are proposing to perform bioremediation. That's a very typical approach for gas stations, for example, and that sort of thing. This is one that, because of the tight soils, it's more of an anaerobic environment than an oxygenated environment, and so we've designed a bioremediation that works in those conditions. And so that is the proposal. What you end up doing basically is digging trenches throughout this area and putting in clean material and then inoculating it with the right kind of material for bioremediation. So just in summary, this describes alternative 2. The cost is $2.2 million. And I note at the bottom of the slide here that this approach can be designed to be compatible with a variety of future land uses. So one option is that this location would continue to be our fueling station for the harbor. We may want to put in below ground storage tanks. Once you do the dig, you could put the tanks back in there. Or it could be a situation where we expand operations for seafood processors or boatyard operations or whatever makes sense up there. But the key is to line up the design of the cleanup at the same time that we're determining future land use. Commissioner Jorgensen?
The fuel dock itself needs to be water level and not, it was fueled for years, 40 years. I fueled up there myself, and the hose would drop down, gas be leaking into the water, and no automatic shut-off valve, and it was a big accident waiting to happen. And so it really needs to be on a float, the source of the fuel hose for the boats.
Yeah. I think that's exactly the issue that our Marina Division and Real Estate Division are looking at as they go through the planning exercise for this area. It was essentially, my understanding, it was designed originally for a commercial fueling dock. Right. It works okay for that, but it's kind of rugged for recreational boaters. And so what our staff is doing right now is working together and with the Working Waterfront Coalition to figure out what is a better design to meet the needs of both commercial fueling and recreational fueling in Blaine Harbor. So that's something that's moving forward on a different track. And for the Model Toxic Control Act cleanup here, that's a separate issue. But it's definitely one that the port staff are working on.
Mike, are those used to fuel both commercial and recreation boats now?
Yes.
Yep.
So when those are gone in the interim, what will they use?
Well, the interim hasn't been defined yet. So it may be that a new fueling station is designed and permitted and built while this is still operational.
Semiahmoo does have fuel.
Yeah, that's another option.
Hang on a sec, Mike. So why are we extending the sheet pile from the pile that was put in there before was because some failure in the slope right there, but why are we extending it here?
It's I'll call it a belt and suspenders approach. So what Ecology has done is they've looked at the level of contamination in that section of the shoreline, and they've said that they want us to extend the sheet pile wall up into that section to make sure that during the implementation of the bioremediation, which can take a year or two, there's no migration of free product across the bank into the marine environment.
Okay. I think you've heard me say this before. The implications of giving up land in an environment like this where we start falling further and further away from the water's edge in the industrial area makes me a little nervous, but in this case that's not probably a likely scenario.
Yeah, I think this is that's a really good point, because what we're trying to do is line up the cleanup with land use. And so in this section of bulkhead, what we're viewing this extension is an opportunity basically to improve the structure there as part of the cleanup using 50% grant dollars. So it's a cost-effective way for us to address that section of shoreline, but only if it meets our land use issues there. And at this point, with input from our planning group, and I didn't mention planning. Planning is also part of the whole view of trying to figure out where fueling should occur here. So planning, real estate, and marinas are all looking at that issue.
Mike, that building with a shorter arrow there, that's a pretty worn out building, isn't it? Isn't that the one where the appliance store was? And
it depends on what you want to use it for. Old buildings can be can be maintained. But when we have looked at it from just the environmental cleanup view, we've looked at the, the possibility of taking that building down to give us more access to do the cleanup. But we also have a number of people up in Blaine that have expressed interest in using one or more of those buildings. So we're working with those interested parties as well, and real estate will come up with a good solution.
I was up there this weekend and for the Blessing of the Fleet, and then I drove all around that area, and this whole industrial area looks pretty worn out compared to the rest of the port facilities there. The treatment plant across the way is nice and looks good, and all of our facilities are first class. But you get out into this, and I don't know if it's the contamination is going to drive it, or what's going to drive it to get marine trades in there.
Yeah. In part, the commission drives it. And we're going to be coming up with our, with our budget workup for next year. But we've been looking at that condition with the same perspective for a few years here, and that's why we're doing this area-wide planning in this section, to try to figure out what is our vision of the future, and then start to drive to that from a number of different perspectives. In this case, the Matka cleanup is the impetus to tackle this footprint, but it's not going to do the whole peninsula. So the whole peninsula is being viewed from, the perspective of planning marinas and real estate as well.
Dan, I appreciate you brought that up, because I'm looking at an image of this right now. So we've got this shoreline, we've got the marine railway, we've got where the fish are unloaded around by the packing plant or the processing plant. We've got the sawtooth, the old, what was that, where the tide would go out, the grid, the underwater grid, what do you call that?
Tide grid.
The tide grid. It's like a $20 million fix, which, we don't charge $6 a linear foot for. So this one's tough.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Commissioner. And those are about the numbers that we've presented at the last few Planning Commission retreats too. You're in the $20 to $30 million range, depending on what you want to see up there. And getting a payback on that kind of investment is tricky in a marine industrial area. But I think if we tackle it incrementally, one project at a time, we'll make some progress. So here's one of them. Okay?
Thank you.
Next steps then, just to recap where we're going here. So the draft RIFS is going to be going out to public. That's an ecology public comment period. It's going to start on May 18th and go through June 16th. All of the RIFS documents will be available at the Blaine Public Library, the Bellingham Public Library, and at the Ecology's Bellingham Field Office. And once we go through that public comment, then we'll make any adjustments that come out of that public comment period and get into drafting the cleanup action plan and consent decree. We think that'll be the focus of attention later on this fall and winter, and probably into the spring of 2016. Then we'll take 2016 to get into the design and permitting for this cleanup, and then probably get into cleanup construction in the spring and summer of 2017. Again, this is just an upland cleanup. Doesn't require, we don't have to work through fish windows or anything. So spring and summer is a good time to do a soil dig and upland remediation. So that's where we're going. And
Do you foresee, Mike, that agreement, I've looked through that agreement between Blaine and the Port of Bellingham. Do you see that becoming an official document? Right now, it's not.
which agreement are you referring to? Sorry.
The one between the Blaine area, the harbor area, and the Port of Bellingham, is, excuse me, the city of Blaine. I'm sorry. City of Blaine and the port, I have it.
Are you talking about the agreement for the road?
I'm talking about the agreement for the development of the marina area. We're going to do this.
That's coming up on the agenda, that one.
Yeah, there's an agreement with the city
Down
about
farther on our agenda, Jim, if that's what you're referring to. It's
Okay, we'll wait.
No, go ahead. I mean, I think it's,
Yeah, that's a master plan for the entire
Wharf
Blaine
District
Harbor
Master
area.
Plan, yeah.
Yeah, so that one has gone through a public process with the port and city, and if
I
Sylvia
didn't
is here.
think it was officially a document, it was just, anyway.
It was a study that was done that was adopted, that we paid for a good portion of, if not all. You know, it's got a lot of ideas in there, as most of those studies do. Most of them have not been implemented because the market conditions don't justify them to be implemented.
It's 8 years old.
That's right, that's right, yep.
Yeah,
Just didn't know if that's what you were speaking to or not when you were mentioning.
sorry, no, there's a different document that focuses on the Blaine industrial area.
Okay.
And it's more of a conceptual plan. It has not been adopted by the Port Commission. It hasn't been posed to the city of Blaine either. It's more of a working document, and that's one that our staff is continuing to work on. One of the issues that we're grappling with is the question of fueling for the Blaine Harbor, and where that should be located. So as we work with stakeholders up there, we'll come up with a proposal and bring that in front of the commission at a later date. Okay?
Yep.
Thank you, commissioners. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mike. Any questions? You look like you want to ask a question.
I look forward to getting some new eyes on this Blaine problem, because it's a huge, expensive problem. So I'm looking forward to getting engaged with you in the next couple of years on this one. So, yeah.
I couldn't hear that, I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm just excited. That's all.
About Blaine? Wow, that is exciting.
Dan's walking into it. This one's a tough one. It's an expensive, difficult fix.
Well, we addressed it at our retreat a little bit last year. It's just a matter of, again, this year and how aggressive we want to get. Right now, it's just, do we want to move forward with the draft? And I think you heard we do.
Well, when the Harbor Cafe disappeared, the wharf area fell apart.
Yeah.
Literally, I tell you, that was a cafe known all along the West Coast, I think. Yep.
Okay, no other questions, comments? Let's move to our second presentation. Welcome.
And Commissioners, Dodd Snodgrass, Port Economic Development Specialist. As you know, outdoor recreation is a big activity in Whatcom County. The range of things going on, and we take advantage of is a real opportunity. An opportunity arose where the city of Bellingham, Whatcom County, Bellingham-Whatcom Tourism, and the port could get together and support an evaluation of the economic impact of outdoor recreation in Whatcom County. So here today to report the findings of that study are the members of Recreation Northwest. We've got Todd Ellsworth to start, and April Claxton to support and provide you the results.
Before you start, Todd, I need to make a quick statement for the record. So I'm on the board of Recreation Northwest, which is a nonprofit here locally. I'm not participating in any part of this discussion today. I've not taken any votes on funding or will not be taking any commission votes or action involving Recreation Northwest services for the Port of Bellingham. And I think in this case, the executive director authorized our portion of the funding with the county, city of Bellingham, and I think tourism engaged in the remaining funding sources.
That's correct. There wasn't a commission vote on that.
Commissioners, let me just state for the record the Ethics and Municipal Government Act. Commissioner, it's a nonprofit board. I assume you're not being paid for your participation on the board?
No, sir.
And there's a specific exemption in that act, even though it's made under your office. So long as you announce it, do not participate in the discussion, and don't take a vote.
Thank you.
Commissioner. And I'll start, well, I'll get into that in a little bit. My name is Todd Ellsworth, and I'm the Executive Director of Recreation Northwest. We are a relatively new organization here in Bellingham. We just started about 2.5 years ago, and the foundation of that is on our signature event, the Bellingham Traverse, which is a multi-sport race that has used port property for the last 14 years. We run out of Marine Park. We also launched an adventure race last year that also uses Marine Park. So it's a long-standing relationship that we've had with the port, and it's exciting for us to get in to do some new type of work. what happened about a year ago is we got excited hearing that Senator Ranker in Olympia was urging the Recreation and Conservation Office to have a study done for the state on the economic impacts of recreation on a state level. And once a vendor was chosen to do that, April, my colleague, contacted Earth Economics and asked them if they would do a more deeper dive, concerted analysis in our county, in Whatcom County. And we were able to really get a good deal on this. And with Director Fix and the mayor and county executive and Lonnie at tourism, we're able to quickly put the funding in place to have this happen. And so we're proud that we were just able to release this study a week ago. It's been about a week. It's been a long
2 weeks.
2 weeks. And so it's just really exciting for us to be able to share this and start putting some numbers together, which I think these are all things that we, in our hearts, feel and know is true about the value of recreation and our recreation lands and our businesses locally. And so now we have some numbers assigned to those, and we'll get into those next. I'd like to introduce April to present the figures.
So as Todd mentioned, we were lucky to be able to build off of a state study. And the Whatcom County study specifically looked at 3 areas of the recreation economy. We looked specifically at the recreation expenditures, consumer spending, recreation businesses here in the county, and additional benefits brought from the recreation lands identified as ecosystem services. And we'll come back and look at all these numbers in more detail. But the first area of the study was recreation expenditures. And this is the area I think most of us think of. This is people out hiking, biking, skiing, boating, and this is the money that they're spending to do that, whether it's gas to get to the mountain or the trailhead, it's the food on the trail or after. For the visitors, it's lodging, and then it's also equipment purchases. And I should mention that in this study, this is visitors and residents combined. So this is taking into account both those areas. In addition to the direct spending, Earth Economics also looked at how this money flows throughout the county. So it's the direct spending combined then with those businesses and their B2B purchases and wages paid to their employees. No big surprise, but we did, of course, identify that Whatcom County is a very active county. Across the state, the average for individuals is getting outside and playing 59 days a year. In Whatcom County, it was 78 days a year. So all told, looking at those recreation expenditures, it's $705 million annually, which is the 8th highest in the state. Some of that money, that's especially with some of the online equipment purchases, some of these other things, some of that money is leaving the county. So the economic contribution really was $585 million a year, which actually is 6th highest in the state. So one piece to note is that recreation expenditures in and on public waters was the highest area with $132 million in spending a year. And on the flip side, the businesses that receive the bulk or the highest amount of spending were our food and beverage, AKA breweries probably, our food and beverage establishments. And this direct spending supports 6,500 jobs in the county. So the second area that the study really looked into is the broader impact that these recreation lands have. This happens to be a specialty of Earth Economics, which I think is one of the reasons that they were chosen by the state to do the study. For Whatcom County, they looked at 3 areas specifically to quantify, and that was some of the added values received for habitat protection, water quality, and aesthetics. And the other 2 I think are pretty self-explanatory, but aesthetics, one of the ways that they quantify that is looking at the increased property values, for example, that you have for homes that are near water, on water access, or close to parks. So looking at that type of value, the 755,000 acres of public lands in the county add an additional $6 to $10 billion in non-market benefits.
Billion.
Those two areas were covered in the state study and have been covered in other similar studies around the country. The area that we were the most excited to dive into was looking specifically at recreation businesses. Because when you look at the spending on recreation activities, some of that's going to the businesses that we think of, the bike shops, the running stores, the boat tours, but it's not necessarily taking into account the manufacturers, the recreation publishers. There's a lot of other businesses tied to recreation that are hiding in various sectors. They're manufacturers, they're retailers, tour operators. There is no recreation economy sector that you can dive in and easily quantify. And that was one of the areas that we really wanted to work to start to look at these businesses as a unit. So worked with Earth Economics on that, and again looked at not just the direct revenues, but also the businesses' secondary spending and wages paid to employees for those businesses. And we have just a couple examples to show some of the ones that we were talking about. We'll let you read the quotes, but the first is McNett. They make gear repair and other outdoor equipment. They've been based in Bellingham for over 30 years, and they very much identify the fact that being here and having these recreational opportunities is a huge value for their employees. Hanfield Brothers is another example, and one that we are excited about as potential for growth for the county. And this is a small bike manufacturer that specifically chose to move here because of the access to mountain biking and the great mountain biking community. So overall, looking at these various businesses tucked away, there we identified 279 recreation-related businesses that have $508 million in annual revenue and are supporting 3,728 jobs.
Thank you, April. We finally have numbers to share and show the value of recreation, not only in the businesses, but also the land we have. And so we're really excited to have this. As we were going through this process, we heard from a lot of people saying it would have been great to have these numbers. I think the reconveyance was a great example where we didn't have a value put on recreation in those lands. And so as we move forward as a community, we now have a benchmark in numbers taken a slice in 2015 to have an understanding of where we are. And so how we're going to use these numbers is, for the port, for example, it's been great to work with Dodd and really get an understanding of his job and how these numbers can help him and John do their jobs better of recruiting either recreation manufacturers or even other light industrial manufacturing for people whose employees value this sense of place we have, and we can demonstrate the value that recreation has. So one of our longer term goals in this is really to kind of continue the work that I've been doing through our events and other activities that we do, is really to help brand Bellingham and Whatcom County as the recreation capital of the Northwest. Not just because we have the most amazing water and mountains and rivers and lakes and parks and everything to play in, but also we have these great businesses here. And again, not just those recreation businesses, but other manufacturing businesses. I think one of the interesting things is, with Mike's presentation, is looking at the evolution of our waterfronts and a balance of the marine trades and recreational marine. That's, as you guys will get a copy of the study if you haven't seen a PDF yet, but Dodd was kind enough to print out some copies for you guys, to really see that boat building and recreational boating leads the list here in the county. And that should be no surprise. So now it's great for us and for you and our community to have this data to help inform your decision making, and also help staff do their job to help really build up what we're going to hopefully have start become part of our vocabulary, is the recreation economy, and for us to really highlight that as a value in our community. So if you have any questions.
Can you go back to your very first slide you brought up? Next one.
Our funders,
Next one.
the pictures?
One more. The one with there,
Rob's
that one
quote?
right there, the one with the beer. Since Commissioner McCauley can't make comments, I need to take advantage of this. When you're counting the days that we recreation outdoors, does that count when Commissioner McCauley is at a brew pub outside for an hour having a beer? Is that one day?
If we went for a paddle beforehand and a swim, and then we went for a beer, that's how that counts. Yep.
Well, on a more serious note, the McNutt Corporation is really very good for our community, and I'm glad you've got them in there. How much was the funding for this project? Or how much? What's the funding, your budget that you get?
The total fund for the project was $15,500.
And basically it was for the study. That's what the port and the county and the city, and did
Yes.
we all split that equally?
Yeah, through the Tri-Funders account is what this came out. And then, well,
Close to
April
equal.
can speak more to that.
Wasn't equal?
I think the port was right in the middle.
Okay.
Typically, the tri-funders don't split things equally. Whatcom County takes the biggest share, the port takes the second biggest, and the city takes the smallest.
But $15,000 for this, good, that's important information. You wish you could comment?
What a unique situation to have, Commissioner McCauley.
You may want to take advantage of this situation, Commissioner Jorgensen.
I'm going to leave that one alone.
Did you have any other comment, Jim?
Well, I would like to say something in regards to biking. That has just become unbelievable recreational sport, I guess you'd call it, in Whatcom County. I just hope that there is, I'm going to say the majority, I may be wrong, but I would like to see some more safety rules, bike lanes, things that really make it much easier for a person that's driving down the road to come upon a group of 15 or 20 cyclists, and boy, they're out, and you know what I'm saying.
I know what you're saying.
I don't know if I don't hear much about that or see much about it in the paper about trying to, straighten that up, I guess, for lack of a better term.
I would love to see that happen. And actually, it's interesting, Commissioner McCauley and I, 10 years ago, even talked about putting together a cycling league to help address situations like that in our community because we don't see it happening. And part of the challenge around that is whose responsibility or who can really, for me, I think it's a public awareness campaign of rules of the road. And it's not just rules of the road, but rules of the trails. And so hopefully as we develop and evolve as a destination for recreation, not only for locals living here, but tourists as well, we have a better understanding of how we can all share.
Well, those numbers have just grown unbelievable.
Yeah, and so that's one thing, and one thing for you as commissioners to consider. Our next steps in this is we hope, and we haven't talked much about this with the funders at all, is I'm hoping that we can do this again in 5 years, and with this as a benchmark, see where we are 5 years from now, which will be 2020 before we know it, to see how the recreation economy has grown here. And then I think for you guys, you may want to have more information about what the profile of boating looks like here in the county. But for me personally, I'm interested in a breakdown on biking. There's so many different types of biking. I don't know how many bikes Rob has in his garage, but I'm sure it's a handful. Yeah.
Yeah, you can sure spend money on bikes.
Yep.
Holy smokes. And couldn't believe it, in the thousands and thousands of dollars. Wow.
Yeah.
20,000 or
Yeah,
whatever.
well, and Yeah, and Dodd has met with Canfield. I don't know if you guys have ever had the opportunity to go out there and look at the bike frames they manufacture. The frames alone sell for about $4,000. But it's just amazing machinery and design and technology that's out there these days.
Used to be able to buy a boat for that.
Yeah.
Well, a small boat.
Right.
Not that big.
Well, I think
Thank
it's
you.
important
Any other
that
questions?
that we did this study and that we put the money up for it. I think it's good, and appreciate the work you've done.
Excellent. Thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to present.
Kind of hard for you not to say anything, Commissioner.
Oh, this is economic development. I just want to jump all over it, so.
Okay, with that, the two presentations out of the way, we'll move to the action item. The first one, executive. Could you read the action item, please, Diane?
Approval of a motion authorizing the executive director to enter into a security services contract with Pacific Security for the period of June 1st, 2015 through May 31st, 2016 for an annual bid amount of $257,458.76 plus a 10% contingency for a total amount of $283,204.76.
Good afternoon, Commission. I'm Neil Clement. I'm the Port's Emergency Management and Security Officer, and in that capacity, I manage the security contract, and that's what brings me here today. About a month ago, under the expert advice of our contract administrator, Susan French, we went ahead and we advertised and solicited bids on a new one-year contract for security services. We received 3 submittals for that. The high bid turned out to not be a responsive bid in that it failed to provide a required bid bond. And the low bid came out with Pacific Security. And today I'm before you to seek your approval to allow the executive director to enter into that contract.
Are all 3 of these bidders, were they all local?
No.
Were any of them local?
The Pacific Security is, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, the other 2 are, I believe, out of Seattle.
Gentlemen, any comments?
Not really. I just recall you saying in past years that it's, I don't know if it's right to say every year it gets a little tougher to get a group that you feel satisfied with, but is that the case this year? Do you feel good about what's happening?
Yeah, no, I feel very, very satisfied with the Pacific Security contract that we have in place now. I will point out that it's interesting to note that 3 years ago, when we last went to bid, the Pacific Security contract, which was the winning bid, was $90,000 more than this one. And that's significant because the airport no longer has to have the amount of guard service they required prior to this year.
Mike, any comments?
I do, thank you, Dan. So in the past, and I believe we've had this contract with Pacific before, I've raised the issue that I think we're not requiring them to pay their lowest wages at a sufficient level for folks to survive on. So I'm going to read something real quick. I won't harp on it too much. Monthly expenses, these are figured by MIT, so take this for what it is. For Bellingham specifically, for a single adult, food, $242 a month. No children, so that child care is $0. $104 a month for medical, $588 for housing. I don't know where you get $588 for housing. $285 for transportation, $73 other expenses. The required monthly income after taxes would be $1,292. Required annual income after taxes is $15,504, and then total income including taxes would be $17,369. And I talked to Neil before, and thanks for sharing the information, Neil. I know that their lowest wage now they're paying is $10.50 an hour. Somehow they're going to squeeze the total hourly charge. What is it? It's $14.60.
$14.60 something.
$14.60 is the contract we're signing. So they're going to run their entire business on $4.10 an hour, including the overhead for the employee. I don't know how they can possibly do that. I do know I've had a few conversations with their staff at some of our events, and I don't know anybody who actually got paid that minimum wage. I'm still not certain that $10.50 an hour is is enough. It is about $1 higher, I think, than when the last contract that we signed with them. I do just want to raise the point again. I want to make sure that we're watching these contracts and not going with the lowest bid because it is the lowest bid, and making sure that companies aren't doing something that's, we can't feel comfortable or confident is also suitable for their employees. So anyway, I just want to leave that there, and I think I'm okay with this contract. I would like to see them raise their rates if they can. I think the lowest minimum, or the lowest bid isn't as important as making sure it's a good quality company with good quality staff. So.
Aren't a lot of these part-time jobs, entry-level jobs?
I think the vast majority are part-time jobs. And in talking with the president of the company, the $10.50 an hour level is our floor. It's not their floor. It's they have their own business model, and they do pay more depending upon longevity and other factors.
Jim, did you have any comment? Neil? Hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Passes.
Thank you very much.
Passes 3-0. Thank you, Neil. Our next item is, action item is in environmental. If you could read it, please, Diane.
A motion authorizing the executive director to execute an aquatic land sediment remediation easement with the Washington State Department of Natural Resources for the Whatcom Waterway site.
Thanks, Diane. Commissioners, this is, I think, the last thing we need to implement Phase 1 of the Whatcom Waterway cleanup. We've talked to you quite a bit about the other requirements, including authorization under Ecology's consent decree and the federal and state and local permits. This is which are all in hand now, and we actually have put the project out to bid. We received favorable bids today that you'll hear about more at the next commission meeting once we have a chance to thoroughly review them to make sure that they're responsive. So we're ready to move forward on the Phase 1 cleanup. The last thing that we have to put in place is this easement with the Department of Natural Resources. DNR is one of our very strategic partners in the Whatcom Waterway. We have 2 agreements in place with them right now. One is essentially a settlement agreement for the Whatcom Waterway, Harris Avenue site, and Cornwall Avenue landfill. The other one is the consent decree itself. So we have worked with DNR to try to make sure that both of our interests are aligned in this easement that they require for doing this kind of work in a state waterway. Frank did a really good job working with them to make sure that this easement is consistent with those other documents, doesn't require the port to do any more or less than is in those other documents. And so we have a easement right now that allows us to do the cleanup. That includes dredging some material, capping other material, removing old dilapidated structures, and installing new structures, for example, new pilings and dolphins that are required under the consent decree. So with this easement, we will be able to move forward and take action. It's identified as a draft in your report. We're still waiting for the final Exhibit A, which is a very specific legal definition of the exact place where the sediment cleanup and other actions will take place. That's a work in progress right now. Any questions on this easement?
One of the paragraphs that I was reading brings the word capping into, which, of course, we're all familiar with what that is. But that seemed like that was so controversial for so many years when we started this whole program with the waterway. Do you hear much about it anymore? Is it negative or?
Well, you're right, Commissioner Jorgensen. I think when we started a number of these projects, just about everything was controversial. Is the cleanup stringent enough? Does capping work? A bunch of different topics. But I think the short answer is now at this point we have a number of different projects that have been through the public process. I think Ecology has done a good job explaining their the basis for their decisions, which typically includes a range of actions, including removal of some contamination and transport to a Subtitle D landfill, capping of other contaminants, and in Bellingham Bay, monitored natural recovery is another element of these cleanups that really addresses the range of contamination we tend to see. So at this point, we don't see a lot of controversy about the design of our environmental caps. We've got a number of projects that are coming online now that include capping where it's appropriate, and they seem to be going through the public and ecology decision-making process in good shape.
Good.
Commissioner McCauley, did you have any questions on the 27-page easement?
No, I don't have any questions. One statement, I just want to reiterate my opposition to the design of this cleanup. However, we'd need an easement regardless, so I'll support this today.
Any other questions? Hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you very much, Commissioners.
Passes 3-0. Thank you, Mike. Our third action item is in the Planning and Economic Development category. Could you please read the action item, Diane?
Before reading the item, I just want to let you know that the action itself has been modified to show the word executive director has been replaced by commission president in terms of executing. And I'll read the motion. A motion authorizing the commission president to execute amendment number 1 to an interlocal agreement with the city of Blaine regarding the development of the Wharf District.
The purpose of that modification was simply the signature block reflected the commission president, and it was easier to modify the action memo than it was the whole document.
And I'd also like to note the first agreement, interlocal, was signed by the commission president, and this is an amendment. So we thought for consistency it would be better to have them both the same. Sylvia Goodwin, planning director. This is an interlocal agreement between the city of Blaine and the Port of Bellingham. It's an amendment to the interlocal that we had agreed in 2008. And the city and port have been working very closely since, well, for a very long time, but in 2006 to 2007, we completed the Wharf District Master Plan of the properties in Blaine that the port owns, and then the city's Marine Park is adjacent to that. The first interlocal, we agreed to jointly work on the gateway area, which was the Marine Drive as it approaches Peace Portal Drive down to where towards the city's wastewater reclamation facility. That was jointly funded by the port and city. The city funded the road improvements under or adjacent to the wastewater reclamation facility. And this interlocal that we're talking about today is for the west end of Marine Drive, so that we can determine the condition of that road and the adjacent bulkheads. We'll work on it later once we get cost estimates to say how do we come up with the money to fund those improvements. But right now we're trying to do a condition survey of the bulkheads and the road bed to see what needs to happen to upgrade that facility. A little history, the road was actually built over a railroad around the turn of the century. It gradually evolved to become a road. It is a public road, but it was never really designed as a road. There's old pilings, there's probably chunks of concrete and various types of fill under the road. So the road has never been particularly strong. The port has been involved over the years working on improvements to the bulkhead. I believe at one time when we dredged the harbor, we put some materials on that road, and then the city has maintained the road as it's continued to settle down the bulkhead and out the bottom because the bulkhead is now failing. So this has been an ongoing issue since the very early 90s and even before. And the road is now finally to the point where last year the road had to be closed to vehicle access, and the city and port have been working jointly to figure out what to do next since that time. So under this interlocal, the port would fund a condition survey. We'll look at the bulkhead on the one side that supports our marina and the road. We'll look at the riprap on the north side of the road. And then we will, if there's money left, take a little closer look at the area between Gate 3 of the marina and the industrial area. But we're focusing right now on the part mostly beyond Starfish, where there's a marina on one side and a bulkhead or a riprap slope on the other. I apologize, I should have brought a map, but I think you're all familiar with the area. So under this interlocal, the port will fund a condition survey. We will look at several different cross sections for how the road will be when it's built, including either a straight bulkhead or riprap going out into the water. We'll look at options for either vehicle access, 2 lanes, a service road that might have only 1 lane, or pedestrian access only, and look at would that impact the cost. And then we're going to do cost estimates. We'll be working closely with the city, and I would like to note Raven White Wolf is here, to make sure that we have the minimum road width that would support emergency vehicles. We'll be working with Andy Peterson. He has to get the trash in and out from the end of the, not he personally, but maybe he personally. We need to make sure that we can deal with safety and security of the site. So those will all go into our cross-section assumptions. And then at the end of this contract, we hope to have alternative costs that then the port and city can work jointly with a public process, getting some input, and work with agencies to see could, for example, the riprap out into the bay, how difficult would that be to get the permitting, and then we can jointly pursue grant funding of the preferred alternative. So the recommendation is to enter into this agreement, and then we will report back to you, hopefully, before the end of the year with some cost estimates.
So this $150,000 is for the study only,
Correct.
and we haven't, have we decided who owns the road, who's responsible for the road? We're gonna do this study and go forward not knowing
Well, we have a pretty good idea. It is a public right-of-way. It was platted around shortly after the turn of the century. It is a public right-of-way, so it is by definition not the port's road because it's not on port land. It's on DNR land with a public right-of-way over it. But that said, it's a joint port-city responsibility. The only way to get out to the port's fishing pier at the end is via that road. And if the road wasn't there, we'd have a lot of waves lapping into that end of our marina. So I think we've agreed that it's a joint responsibility that we need to work cooperatively on it. And it doesn't really matter exactly who owns the facility, other than that it's in both of our interests to make sure that it is still open to the public and that it does continue to support our marina. So.
Well, surely the citizens of Blaine think of that pier as being one of the most unique places in the community, a good place to go out and sit there and just contemplate. And it's so popular for crabbing, and anyway, you know about some of those things, Sylvia, because you live there. And I can't imagine that not being accessible by cars. I just can't imagine the pedestrians. You're going to, all the ADA people are going to wilt in the sun and whatever. So I sure hope that there can be some way, I know it's a lot of money, some way that can be really considered to make that functional again as accessible for vehicles.
Yeah, and we have heard that comment from a number of citizens of Blaine. The good thing about this interlocal and this study is that when we're done, we should have fairly good cost estimates and know what's the incremental difference of having cars out the pier versus just pedestrians. And the main difference is because of the stormwater needs. If you don't have cars driving out there, it would be cheaper to treat the stormwater. And, we're really looking more at the condition of the bulkhead, but we'll look at all of those factors when we look at the
I suppose you could have, folks sitting here probably saying, gosh almighty, if that would have been an open road and not under repair like it is, that bus would have gone all the way out and off the pier, splashing in the water. People, well, not people.
When we had that happen a year ago, you remember a car went off the
Yeah.
that pier. I want to just add on to what Sylvia said here, because I think I disagree with what she said. In all my conversations with the city manager, it has been that the port is responsible for the riprap or the bulkhead that protects the road, but the road is solely the responsibility of the cities and not the ports.
So
That's how it is.
so the port's riprap is saving the city's road.
And it's not, it's not even
put
technically the
perspective.
port's
I'm kidding,
riprap.
I'm kidding.
It's also protecting the
Jordan,
marina.
yeah.
I mean, the biggest reason for that
Yes,
that
it's-
riprap is to protect
It's
our marina.
protecting the
and our-
marina, yes,
yeah.
absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
I think the road is almost an afterthought, so I appreciate that, not an afterthought, but it's not there because of, it was a road first, but it was serving many other purposes before it was ever a road. so.
And it started as a railroad trestle.
Yeah. Quick question for you, and Dan, thanks for asking that question, the same question about responsibility and ownership. Apparently, that's essentially been settled, which is okay. But there's a question of cost sharing. So has that been determined? I know that's not part of this agreement, but actually allocating costs after preferred design has been chosen. Has that been discussed in
That
detail?
has been discussed. It has not been settled. I think once we know what the costs are, then we can start talking about how are we going to generate the revenue to pay those costs. But it's hard to really have a meaningful discussion about how are you going to split a cost when you don't know how many million are you talking about. And we're also hoping to jointly pursue grants. I think if a city and a port are working jointly together with agencies, we might have a stronger argument to get some grant funding.
Would it be fair to say, based on what Rob just said, that we might be looking at the majority of the costs for bulkhead work, riprap, that sort of thing?
That's my agreement with the city manager. Of what I've conveyed to him in conversation is that we would take responsibility for the costs of the riprap and the bulkhead that protect our marina and protect the road, but they would have to take responsibility for the road costs. We don't know what those costs are yet, but that's all my conversations have been towards that. We've never agreed to anything else.
Probably be amendment number 3 to the interlocal, amendment number 2 to the interlocal.
Well, I'm really glad that we're moving forward on this because that is a nice pier. The pier's great, the road getting to it.
Just getting to it, you kind of lose a tire here and there.
And it really is a nice pier, and I do think fixing that up is important, so I'll be voting in favor of it.
So a quick question, we still have kind of an ugly fence. I know, Rob, I asked you if we could put up a split rail fence, something nice. Didn't happen, it's okay. So how much longer are we looking at no vehicle access out there? Because I know that's been near and dear to your heart, Jim, is having the availability of vehicle access.
Well, we definitely won't be constructing anything this summer. This summer, we're going to get the condition survey and the cost estimate, and we're hoping to even get that done before both the city and the port adopt budgets next year. So conceivably, there could be construction the following year, but again, we don't have any revenue right now or any budget, neither the city or the port, for construction. So that will be probably a budget question during this budget season or next budget season.
So permitting requirements on this, so that might take another, would these be onerous in this case, since it's a lot of repair versus?
Well, replacement of an existing bulkhead would probably be less permitting than if you want a riprap slope out into the harbor, but the riprap slope will probably be less expensive. So we don't really know yet.
Okay. And then one final thing. I had a conversation with a fellow from Blaine, I do not recall his name, maybe a year and a half ago. So I want to just throw this out there again. I don't think Dan's heard me say this. He made a request, he's a kayaker, for a ramp, a concrete ramp on the northwest side of the bulkhead, which would be out into the bay as opposed to using the inside. I don't know what that would cost or if it's just completely crazy or not, but he said as a kayaker that would make the most sense for kayakers. So
Right.
if I could just throw that out there and somebody has a conversation about it and tells me that it sounds kind of cool, but it's crazy or it's really expensive or yes, And I just,
Well, I'll tell you what we probably can't look at the design of a concrete ramp as part of this interlocal, but I will talk to Alex Winger and the city, and again, Raven is here. They've done a lot of work on their soft beach and putting a more gravel beach like we did at Marine Drive, and I would expect as a kayaker that would make it a little easier to carry your kayak into the water. The city also has a fairly good kayak launch over off Runge on into Dakota Creek that kayakers can use. So I'll talk to the city about that and get you some information on what might be available and what they might be thinking.
thank you.
Well, the northwest side of that, half the time the tide's way out. I don't know how you'd get a kayak in the water there.
Right.
I mean, that's an awful muddy area for a long way out.
Is our boat launch not sufficient for that, or is it
Just the messenger.
Todd, do you want to comment on that?
I asked the same question. I said, you got a whole marina, what's the problem?
Yeah.
I'm
Right.
not familiar with the soft beach,
Yeah, the
although I
boat
think it's
launch
muddy over there.
actually
Yeah.
will work for kayaks, but then you have to kayak all the way through the harbor to get out to the bay. And if
I
you
think my
were-
understanding
yeah.
from him was, and I know there's no bar there, but it can be challenging, difficult, and dangerous to come in the end of the marina where the boats come in. So I think that was the majority of his point, was it's just more difficult and dangerous coming in that direction.
Well,
Okay.
You really hear all kinds of proposals. I don't know if you heard the one about building a bridge from the
Oh,
end
yeah.
of the wharf over to Semiahmoo.
I've been hearing
That's-
about the bridge to Semiahmoo for at least 25 years, but I haven't
Really
noticed
was
it
brought
yet.
up and discussed.
Sink the plover.
Okay,
And then
any
put in
other
a pontoon
questions?
bridge right over it. I'm kidding. Plover's on. I said that for Todd's because we're gonna go play with the plover next month.
Do you have any other
No,
questions?
sir, thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you very much, Sylvia.
Okay, thank you.
So with that in mind, hearing no other questions, all those in favor?
All right.
Aye.
Aye. That passes 3-0.
Commissioners.
Thank you. Now, we're on to new business. Gentlemen?
So, Frank, can I ask you a question? Can I make a comment regarding the presentation earlier?
Say again, sir?
Can I make a comment now regarding the presentation earlier from Recreation Northwest?
You can make a comment about the commissioner's comments about you, but not the presentation.
Okay. Well, I'll talk to Rob about.
That's my interpretation of the law, to
About
give you a
how
little
this
leeway.
information might help inform us on our property behind the plywood plant.
You can ask me, and I can ask the question.
That's a broad interpretation of the law to give you a little leeway
I
to
think I just took
swing
it
back.
if you didn't notice, so, yeah. Thank you.
Jim, did you have anything else?
No, sir.
Hearing no other action, we are adjourned.
Thank you.